A beloved husband enjoying his golden years is found gunned down in his home.
Oh, God, he's dead. There's blood on the pillow.
His watch and wallet were missing. We felt that robbery could have been a motive.
His elderly widow suspects a mystery man she saw lurking in the neighborhood.
She did tell us about a suspicious person that she saw.
He looked kind of like that man that comes by here once in a while and gets some money from my husband.
Could he have showed up and done this homicide while she was out?
But when shocking secrets surface, investigators find themselves chasing an unlikely culprit and a master manipulator with a deadly past.
She went by different aliases. She had different social security numbers.
She didn't want any of us to tell her secrets, to be exposed.
When you dig into all the facts and all the details, you start to see him just a monster.
In a matter of a second, she would be the devil himself.
July 20th, 2016. At approximately 7:20 a.m., North Carolina police receive a frantic call from an Aberdeen resident named Frankie Kellis.
Moore County 911. I think my husband's dead.
How old is he?
72. Oh, God, he's dead. There's blood on the pillow.
On the 911 call, she did seem out of breath, kind of like frantic. So that's when everyone started responding to the residents.
The dispatcher instructs Frankie to try to attempt CPR on her husband, but Frankie tells the dispatcher she's 80 years old, has limited mobility.
Okay, we need to get him on the floor.
I'm not able. I'm disabled. I can't lift him.
Okay, are you able to grab his feet and pull him towards you?
I try. Honey, I can't do it. I can't. I'm just not able.
Unfortunately, by the time first responders arrive, it's too late to save her husband, Dallas.
It was obvious that he was not here anymore. He was deceased.
When EMS began trying to render aid, they realized there was blood on the pillow. So they started looking for the source of the blood, and they noticed an injury on the back of his head that they thought might be a gunshot wound.
They were kind of taken aback by this because Frankie didn't mention in the 911 call that he had been shot.
Initially, it's just a medical call. Then it becomes, we've got to lock this scene down. Now we've got a big investigation on our hands. Crime scene tape goes up, we isolate witnesses, and then we bring investigators in. He had a small caliber wound to the lower back portion of his neck, and the same thing to the back of his head.
It was evident that his injury was not self-inflicted. No gun was visible close by.
The police contacted my dad, and Dad let me know that Uncle Dallas had been killed. Uncle Dallas was a friendly guy, do anything for anybody that he could. It's one of those situations that you wonder how that could happen.
Dallas Leon Kellis was born in rural North Carolina near the end of the Great Depression.
My Uncle Dallas was raised by my grandmother. My grandfather was killed in an automobile accident, and I think it was 1940. So times are tough, and Uncle Dallas was the baby. He was the youngest of 7, and they definitely learned at an early age what work was about. He graduated from a high school in West End, North Carolina, and after that it was the United States Army.
After serving in the military, Dallas returned to Aberdeen and took a job as a machinist at a local textile mill.
In 1968, he married the love of his life, Louise Cole.
My Aunt Louise, she was a little older than my Uncle Dallas and had a couple of daughters from a previous marriage. Uncle Dallas, he was, almost say a dapper Dan, a sharp-dressed man, always everything altered, whole 9 yards, and they were happy together. They did well for themselves and built a nice house outside of Aberdeen. Church was the big thing. They enjoyed going to church and enjoyed doing things with the church. So that was their primary focus. Uncle Dallas, he enjoyed working out in the yard. They were good people and worked hard.
Dallas and Louise enjoyed 41 years together until she passed away in June 2009.
Pretty much age, and life just kind of caught up with her.
Dallas was heartbroken, but after a year of mourning, he opened up to the possibility of finding love again.
It gave the church ladies hope because he was considered to be a little bit of a catch. He had that little Burt Reynolds laugh that you'd get out of him every once in a while, but he had a laugh that was infectious. He was always one that was approachable and one that was there for you, and you knew that he was.
In 2010, someone captured his heart, but it wasn't one of the ladies from church. It was a woman from his past who was also recently widowed after the passing of her third husband.
Much to everyone's surprise, Dallas reconnects with an ex-girlfriend from his 20s named Margaret Francis Bright, better known to her loved ones as Frankie.
My grandmother grew up in a little town called Elizabethtown, North Carolina. She is the youngest of all of her siblings, the baby out of, I believe, at least 6. I didn't get to meet my great-grandparents, but I was told that they coddled her and she always got her way. My grandmother met Dallas in her 20s or before then. And so they had, a past relationship from what I was told. And after my granddaddy Jr. passed away and she moved back to North Carolina, my grandmother and Dallas rekindled their relationship in their 70s.
Although 50 years had passed, Dallas and Frankie quickly fell back in love. They were married the following year in February 2011.
They didn't date very long before they got married because it's you're older. It's why wait? You never know when, it's going to be your last day. My grandmother and Dallas, they spent their time working out in the yard, watching TV like Wheel of Fortune. The old shows like Matlock, the normal things that older couples do together.
The reunited couple were enjoying their golden years together. But now, a bullet has shattered their second chance at love.
We're trying to establish a motive. Why would someone want to kill Dallas? It is important to rule out the spouse. That way we can focus our efforts on different people or suspects.
When investigators sit down with Frankie to find out what happened, she is understandably distraught.
I might appear to be strong, but inside right now I'm dying. I've always had to hold up for everybody else, but I lost a son the 29th of November. I raised him, he was my grandson. I lost a daughter last year.
We've had some rough time. I'm sorry.
Frankie says she and Dallas were supposed to attend the funeral of a family member that day, so she woke up around 5 a.m. to get ready.
I came in here, I turned that coffee pot on so I could fix me a cup of coffee. And I walked back there and told him, I said, I'm gonna fix some breakfast. He said, no, don't do that. He said, go get us McDonald's and get us a ham sandwich.
She said she went to McDonald's, got a ham biscuit, she went by the post office and came back home.
I called him, he didn't come. So I walked out there and got the paper, and I come back, he still wasn't here. I thought, well, he's taking an awful long time in the bathroom. So I walked down there and I saw that blood, and that's when I called.
Frankie tells investigators that she thinks someone might have broken into the house while she was out because Dallas's wallet and his watch are both missing from the nightstand.
With her saying that his watch and wallet were missing, then we felt that robbery could have been a motive, but we didn't see any signs of a struggle.
If individuals had come into the house and were looking to steal items of value, they would have been tearing up the house looking for it.
If someone breaks into a house, you know, we see what's missing, the door kicked in, but the house was immaculate, very clean, organized. We didn't see anything else missing. That was stuck out. That was odd. Immediately, there's something suspicious here.
Coming up, a closer examination of the body offers new theories.
Looking at the gunshot to the back of the neck, it was a pretty close range shot.
And a family grudge points investigators toward a suspect.
Dallas's family was very vocal about Dallas not caring for her grandson.
Detectives in North Carolina are interviewing the widow of Dallas Kellis, who just found the victim shot dead in their home.
She did tell us about a suspicious person that she saw as she was leaving the residence to go get breakfast.
There was a guy walking that way. I do remember seeing him when I came back. He looked kind of like that man that comes by here once in a while and gets some money from my husband. Sure. My husband's a good-hearted man. He don't like to give money to nobody. But he said he'd probably go and buy booze with her or something.
Unfortunately, Frankie is unable to recall any details. And other than the missing belongings, there is little evidence of a break-in.
There was no signs of forced entry. There was nothing that appeared to be missing. Everything looked in order.
Do you leave the doors unlocked when you leave?
We don't time we lock them so we go to bed.
Okay. What kind of weapons are in the house?
He got a shotgun there. I don't even know what kind of rifle.
There was a .22 rifle. It was pretty clear by looking at the gun that had been there for a while and had not been recently shot.
The size of the wound, I mean, wasn't large to what a shotgun would leave. So the shotgun was not the murder weapon either.
I was looking at the gunshot to the back of the neck. It did go through the shirt. And I could see what looked like powder burns. That kind of gave me the indication that it was a pretty close range shot. The body was removed from the house and taken to Raleigh for an autopsy.
Investigators hope the medical examiner will be able to confirm the caliber of the gun used to kill Dallas.
Without a murder weapon, it was beginning to look like whoever shot Dallas had taken the gun with him. At the same time, with no other suspects, it was important for investigators to corroborate the alibi that Frankie had given.
Officers wanted to verify that she did in fact go to McDonald's. So they go and they check, they get a video, and they get her on the video.
We decided to do a gunshot residue test on Frankie just to see if it would indicate that she had shot any weapons.
When they were talking with her, she had like a washcloth that she kind of kept wiping her hands with.
That made the gunshot residue test that we performed on Frankie inconclusive.
Though Frankie isn't completely cleared, for now, her alibi appears to check out.
With Frankie's whereabouts accounted for, detectives begin pursuing the only other lead they have. They begin canvassing the neighborhood, trying to see if anyone else saw the man that Frankie described.
We always have to start with the people surrounding them. Who do they know? Who would have a motive, opportunity? We look at those things.
We spoke to the neighbors next to them, behind them. no one had seen this person that she was talking about.
Just walking down the road near their house, there is a convenience store up there that people walk to on occasion.
We were allowed to look at their surveillance system, and we looked at, I would say, several hours before and several hours after. We didn't see a person walking down the street.
Frankie's next-door neighbor says he did see someone in the driveway with Dallas a few weeks ago.
The neighbor provided us with information that someone arrived at Dallas's residence in a silver Mustang, and he recalls both of them, Dallas and this person, looking at a silver gun. We learned that it was a revolver.
Afterwards, Dallas is seen shooting the pistol around his property. It almost seemed as if this guy showed up and sold Dallas a pistol.
We didn't locate a handgun inside the house. So from then, I believed that was going to be the murder weapon.
Frankie had claimed that the couple didn't own a handgun. So naturally, the question became, why did she lie? And what other things she might be lying about.
According to his loved ones, Dallas wasn't the kind of man who made enemies. But there was bad blood between him and Frankie's grandson, Uriah.
My grandmother raised Uriah. He lived with her a lot up until she got married and, moved in with Dallas. And I know that his relationship was probably also had a wedge between Dallas and her.
After we learned about Uriah, we spoke to Dallas's family, and they were very well aware of who Uriah was. Dallas's family was very vocal about Dallas not caring for Uriah. He wasn't a good person. He has some bad habits that Dallas did not care for. Uriah was not allowed to be at his residence.
It did appear that Uriah was being kicked out of the house he was living at with his uncle. But we wondered if maybe that Frankie was trying to move him into the house with him. And we speculated, was there an argument that ensued over that?
And we learned that he actually flew in the day of Dallas's murder.
And the first thing we thought is, could he have showed up and done this homicide while she was at McDonald's?
Investigators contact the airlines and discover Uriah's flight arrived earlier that morning.
One thing we had to consider is, did he have time to come down and do this homicide?
We checked, and he was actually still en route to North Carolina when the murder occurred. So with that, it ruled him out as a suspect.
But as detectives continue their interviews, a new lead takes the case in a different direction.
2 days after Dallas's death, one of our officers gets a call from a distant relative to Frankie.
According to her relative, Frankie is hiding things from investigators.
And he tells us that Frankie's known to carry a revolver with her everywhere she goes. And then in his opinion, he didn't feel like that she would be afraid to use it.
At this point, we're thinking she's not this little lady that people think she may be. That's just a image that she puts on.
"48 hours into the investigation of Dallas Kellis's murder, a witness sheds new light on the grieving widow. A seemingly kind grandmother no one would look at twice for murder.
At this point, Frankie had already lied to investigators about the revolver and the handgun. So investigators began to wonder what else she might be lying about.
When detectives question more of Frankie's family, including 2 of her granddaughters, they learn the gun isn't the only thing she's been hiding.
Several of Frankie's family members didn't seem surprised by this information. They knew that she was known to carry a firearm with her.
It's a major red flag for detectives that Frankie would hide the fact that she carries a handgun.
Now investigators have to figure out, is there a possibility that she's the one who killed her husband? So investigators began to look more deeply into her background.
Frankie's granddaughters tell police she's been married 4 times and left a trail of broken homes behind her.
She didn't really raise any of her kids. She just kind of like left. She got remarried and the same thing, just kind of abandoned her children, to say the least. You know, maybe not Mother of the Year.
She wasn't close with her 5 children, but by the time her grandchildren were born, Frankie seemed determined to redeem herself.
My grandmother would be the one that you would call if you needed somebody to be there for you. She would do anything for her grandkids and the people that she loved.
But according to one of her granddaughters, that included teaching them how to shoplift.
My grandmother's not the typical grandmother, right? That you think of little old lady who bakes pies, comes over for birthdays.
She would have them commit crimes as kids. She would have them go into stores and steal items. And when they were caught, pretend like she had no idea that they were stealing. She appeared to be a sweet, nice lady, you know, like what a grandmother would look like. But she was not what she portrayed to be.
Based on this information from her granddaughters, investigators run a background check, which reveals Frankie's crimes included more than just petty theft.
Frankie went by different aliases. She had different Social Security numbers, different Social Security cards. One of Frankie's family members said that Frankie would sell her prescription medication to people. She had charges for prescription fraud, regular fraud, and shoplifting.
When we get to digging into Frankie's background, we find out she's been to federal prison for drug charges.
Her family told us she was actually released in 2010, and that was when she met Dallas.
According to Frankie's granddaughter, after 7 years in prison and marrying Dallas, things changed.
As a family, we were told that he didn't like us. And that was kind of hard, and that kind of puts a wedge in between me and my grandmother. I wouldn't put it past her to keep us away from him, because maybe she didn't want any of us to tell her secrets.
Detectives pay Frankie another visit to confront her with their findings, only to discover she's gone missing.
We executed an additional search warrant at the residence again.
Investigators are unable to locate the handguns during their search, but they do make another discovery.
We found clothes laying on the floor in front of the closet. The clothes were a blouse, some shorts. There was a spot that could possibly be blood. We also collected the clothes that she was wearing back when we arrived to the house.
And in her dresser, they find something even more incriminating.
We actually locate his wallet and his watch.
When investigators found the watch and wallet that Frankie claimed had been stolen, that immediately cast doubt over the whole robbery theory.
It was apparent that it was being concealed or hid from us. When we look in the wallet, all his cards are there, his driver's license is there, and we knew she was lying. Frankie definitely was a suspect.
Detectives in North Carolina have just uncovered evidence indicating Frankie Kellis may be involved in the murder of her husband, Dallas. When looking closer at the couple's financial records, they provide a potential motive.
Dallas was retired. I know he worked all his life, and he worked for that retirement. He was very, in a way, financially stable. His checkbooks were balanced, payments were on time, and then we started seeing discrepancies.
We found bills that looked like they were being paid where the envelope had the statement and the amount of the check, but the check was missing. We also found some checks that had recently been returned as insufficient funds.
There were several checks made out to Frankie, and the signature on it said Dallas, but it was quite apparently not Dallas's signature based on his signature cards from the bank.
We started seeing insufficient funds in the accounts. She was spending thousands and thousands of dollars, which alarmed us.
The evidence we found in the house gave us the impression that Mr. Kellis was being bled dry. It was about $39,000 of debt that had been accrued since Frankie came into the picture.
Records indicate Dallas wasn't the only person Frankie was defrauding.
They found some checks that had been written by LaRue Green to Mrs. Kellis. LaRue Green is the older sister of Dallas Kellis. But there was one check that did not appear to have the same signature on it.
We did go by, interview Dallas's sister, and she said that she was unaware that the checks were missing, and the checks that were cashed and forged, she had no knowledge about.
Dallas's sister says she has no idea where Frankie might have gone. The last time they spoke was the morning Dallas was killed.
She informed us that she received a call that morning from Frankie telling her that Dallas had passed away. What we found odd with that phone call was that she had called LaRue Green at 7:06 a.m., but she did not make the 911 call until 7:21. That's a big red flag that you're going to call 911 15 minutes later.
So how do you go from he's dead to I think he's dead? And then she claims to have done CPR.
The medical dispatcher asked her to perform CPR on the victim, and you could audibly hear her indicate that she checked the pulse.
Okay, pump the chest hard and fast, at least twice per second and 2 inches deep.
Okay, 1, 2, 3.
Looking at the body, it appeared that he hadn't been moved, which told us that CPR was not attempted. I mean, you are a sweet, innocent, helpless lady. Your husband just was murdered. Why lie? But when you're telling me initially that I tried to do CPR, you tell his sister, he is dead. Why lie to us?
When lab results come in, Frankie's clothing collected at the crime scene offers the strongest evidence against her.
The clothing that we were able to send off, it in fact did have gunshot residue on it.
Now, as the manhunt for Frankie continues, police get a tip that suggests this grandmother is on the move and her crime spree isn't over just yet.
I received a phone call from a family member of Frankie's in Georgia. She believed that Frankie and Uriah were going to kill them.
Frankie and Uriah showed up at the house in Georgia, unannounced.
It's not like they speak or have a relationship, so it was odd for them to even show up. They're being really weird. And one point, Frankie tells Uriah, hey, grab the candy.
He reaches in and grabs something which she felt like was a gun and put it in his waist. At that time, she went ahead and locked the doors and called for the sheriff's office to come out there because she felt frightened.
By the time police arrive at the residence, over 300 miles away from Aberdeen, Frankie and Uriah are gone. Investigators quickly move to obtain an arrest warrant.
After I got indictments for the murder, we had witnesses, family members come forward and provide us information that Frankie was actually back in Aberdeen at her residence. We did a drive-by to verify that she was there, and we actually saw Uriah in the driveway.
But with no sign of Frankie, detectives sit back and wait.
As we set up on the house, we actually see Frankie drive around towards the rear of the house and into the woods and took a side road in a way to, in my opinion, to evade from being seen. And when she hit the main road, we initiated a traffic stop. As soon as I pulled over and I walked up to the car, sweet lady, she's just clueless to why we're there. No idea. And then we tell her she's under arrest. She wasn't upset, really even asked why. Just puts on this persona that she's a sweet old lady.
Coming up, Frankie offers an explanation for her odd behavior.
I'm in early stages of dementia.
And an alarming pattern is brought to light.
He believed that she was involved with the deaths of her previous husbands.
After 2.5 months of investigation, North Carolina police have arrested Frankie Kellis for the murder of her husband, Dallas.
When Frankie Kellis was arrested, her grandson Uriah was at the house. So they brought Frankie to the sheriff's office to talk to her, and they also had Uriah come up to the sheriff's office.
Although Uriah is not charged with any crime, he agrees to provide a statement. Frankie is much less cooperative.
We placed them in separate interview rooms, and I would say the hardest interview I've ever done occurred. She was tough. I would corner her into, hey, I know you're lying and this is why. She would try to control the interview.
I want you to tell me why I'm here.
I got an indictment for you. The charges are murder and forgery of instrument and uttering forged instrument. So that's why you're here.
Forge? And who did I kill?
I know you have a lot of questions, just like I do.
You can ask me after a while what we talked about, and I can't tell you, but go ahead.
Okay.
I'm in early stages of dementia.
What do you think about what you're charged with?
I think it's wrong.
Why?
Because I'm not guilty. I haven't killed my husband.
She claims she only left town because of her grief over her husband's death.
I can't stay there long at a time. I get so upset, miss him so bad.
Okay.
He was good to me.
But when police confront her with the holes in her story, Frankie's demeanor suddenly changes.
That's not true. That's not true. That's not true. That's a lie. I'm not even going to discuss that with you because it's not true.
She was the sweetest, nicest lady, and then in a matter of a second, she would be the devil himself. Anytime that we would present evidence to her that would show that she was lying, she would completely change.
Herein lies the problem too, because 15 minutes after you call a RU and you call 911.
I'm not going to discuss that because I don't know the time.
Okay. Look,
I'm not going to talk to you.
Listen to me. Calm down. I ain't even answered your question yet.
You're sitting over there trying to contradict everything I said.
When detectives question Uriah, he seems reluctant to cross his grandmother.
Uriah was interesting in a way where he was afraid of Frankie, but he was loyal to her. He would just make comments like, you guys don't know who Frankie is. the things that she's done.
According to Uriah, Dallas isn't the first of Frankie's 4 husbands to meet an untimely end.
She had been married 4 times, and he only knows of one that died of natural causes. He believed that she was involved with the deaths of her previous husbands. He volunteered information about Frankie allegedly overdosing one of her husbands on purpose.
According to Uriah, the victim was Frankie's second husband, Howard. And the two were still newlyweds at the time.
Allegedly, she goes on a honeymoon and, comes back and the family's looking for their father and she has him in an urn.
She had cremated immediately.
Though the accusations of foul play were well known among both families, the incident was never investigated, and Frankie vehemently denied having a hand in Howard's death. Still, Uriah's statement strengthens the case against Frankie.
She would have been presented well in front of a jury as far as getting rolled out in a wheelchair and having that sweet old lady look. But I do believe that I obtained a sufficient amount of evidence to show that that's not who she is.
But prosecutors worry it might not be enough for a jury to convict a harmless-looking octogenarian.
We don't have the forensic evidence that points, this is who did it. It's a circumstantial case where you just keep building on each piece of evidence.
Frankie had lied to investigators about the revolver and the handgun.
She said she was giving him CPR, but that was not true. The wallet, she says, it was stolen, and they find a wallet in her room. So it's not, one big link, but it's several small links together.
But there really isn't like a smoking gun.
In October 2016, almost 3 months after Dallas Kellis was shot, his wife Frankie is charged with the murder.
She was also charged with felony forgery of an instrument for the check belonging to Dallas Kellis' sister, LaRue Green.
Based off the evidence, I believe that Frankie was spending Dallas's money without him knowing at first. Dallas found out and confronted Frankie before his murder.
Dallas kept a financial journal, and it was very meticulous. There were several cash advance checks that she had signed against Dallas's finances in the month or 2 leading up to his death.
Frankie knew she had bled Dallas out as much as money as she could get, and that he was about to cut her off.
I believe that she took the firearm that the neighbor reported seeing and shot Dallas while he was asleep. To come up with a story to tell law enforcement, she did go to McDonald's. She got food for one. She came back home, called Dallas's sister, told her in a way what happened to, I think, cover her tracks, and then decided to call 911.
Unfortunately, the case against Frankie is largely circumstantial.
In today's society, you have the CSI effect where people want to see smoking guns, they want to see the ballistics, they want to see DNA evidence and fingerprints. And in this case, we didn't really have it. There were no shell casings. Pretty much we just had Mr. Kellis laying there.
We located a small caliber rifle in the house, but it didn't turn out to be what he was shot with. It was more of a culmination of the evidence that just kept stacking up over time. She claims she does CPR on him. There's no evidence that CPR was performed on him. She says, well, his wallet and his watch are missing, and then we find that hidden in her dresser drawer.
Even the gunshot residue found on Frankie's clothes is of limited value as evidence.
defense attorney would say, well, couldn't it have been that she got gunshot residue on her clothing because she leaned against her husband trying to give him CPR? And so when we were making decisions about what to do with the case, those are things that we think about.
As her trial date approaches, every court hearing gives prosecutors more cause for concern.
In the courtroom, Frankie didn't really look like the type of person who was capable of killing their husband. She was frail, she was in a wheelchair, she just looked like somebody's grandma.
The jury, if we went to trial, they would see her in the wheelchair. They would see this, by now 83-year-old woman charged with murder. They're going to have sympathy for her.
Ultimately, prosecutors decide not to risk putting Frankie in front of a jury. Instead, they offer her a plea deal in June 2019.
Frankie Kellis pled guilty to voluntary manslaughter. She received a sentence of 84 months minimum, 113 months maximum. She got credit for that time she spent in the Moore County Jail. So from the October 4th of 2016 until October 2nd of 2023, she served, my math is correct, 7 years.
It really blows my mind that she was able to put on this sweet old lady persona, at least at appearances. And, you know, when you dig into all the facts and all the details, you start to see just a monster.
I was told that if she can be incarcerated in the past and get through it, that she could get through it this time. And she did. She made it out. I have contact with her, you know. I talk to her. I know that some of my family doesn't have any contact with her whatsoever.
I wish there would have been something that we could have done to make a difference in that. I thank the world of Uncle Dallas, and nobody deserves to have done what he had done to him.
Gets an allowance from his older brother. Now, where is it? It's in the van, Rodney's side. But it's mostly those unbreakable umbrellas we bought from Boyke. I tried one this morning. It snapped the second a light breeze hit it. Dell didn't look up. That's because you don't know the technique. Rodney, you have to open them with finesse. They're not umbrellas. They're aerodynamic sunshades. It's all in the marketing. Raquel entered, Danian trailing behind her. The boy was wearing a t-shirt that said Future Millionaire, a gift from Dell that currently felt like a cruel joke. Dell, we've had another letter from the council. Raquel said, her voice weary. They're asking about the arrears again. Dell stood up, smoothing his waistcoat. Don't you worry about the council. Sweetheart, I've got a meeting this afternoon with a very influential business associate. Top-level stuff. Is it Trigger? Rodney asked, deadpan. Dell paused, his hand on the door handle. He might be in the vicinity, yes, but that's irrelevant. We are the Trotters. We've been down before, but we always bounce back. Like those rubber balls that never stop. They're called Super Balls. Dell, Rodney corrected. And eventually, they hit someone in the eye and get confiscated. Chapter 16, The Nag's Head Resurrection. The Nag's Head was the spiritual home of the Trotter Empire, a place where legends were told and where beer was served at a temperature that could only be described as room adjacent. As Dell and Rodney walked in, a hush fell over the bar. It was the kind of silence usually reserved for a funeral or a surprise inspection by the health department. Trigger was at his usual spot, looking as if he hadn't moved since the mid-70s. Denzel was nursing a half-pint, and Sid was behind the bar, polishing a glass that looked like it had been used to store gravel. "All right, Dave," Trigger said, nodding at Rodney. "It's Rodney," Rodney sighed, for the 10,000th time. "Heard about the show, Dell," Sid said, leaning over the bar. "Me and the wife were watching. She said she liked your suit, said it made you look like a very successful magician." Dell ignored the barb. "It's all part of the game." Sid: "High stakes, high rewards. We were testing the waters, weren't we?" Rodney: "I was testing the limits of human embarrassment," Rodney muttered. "Don't listen to him," Dell said, ordering a large cognac. "He's got executive stress. Now, Denzel, I hear you've been having trouble with Yurvin's suspension." Denzel looked up, wary. "How do you know that?" "I have my sources," Dell said, leaning in. "And it just so happens that Trotter's independent traders under the new and vibrant leadership of Rodney here has just acquired a consignment of high-performance shock absorbers. Straight from Germany." "Germany?" Denzel asked. "Or a garage in Lewisham?" Dell looked hurt. "Denzel, would I lie to you? They're military grade, built to withstand a direct hit from a tank. Your van will feel like a magic carpet." "How much?" Denzel asked, his curiosity getting the better of his common sense. "For you, a mere £100, plus a small administration fee for the managing director." Dell nudged Rodney. Rodney, tell him about the quality." Rodney looked at Denzel, then at Dell, then at his beer. "They're round, and they've got springs, I think." "See?" Dell beamed. "The man's a genius. Right, let's seal the deal." Sid: "A round for my friends, on Rodney's tab." Chapter 17, The Suitcase in the Van. The sun was beginning to set over Peckham, casting long, orange shadows over the estate. Dell and Rodney were back at the van, the shock absorbers, which looked suspiciously like painted PVC pipes, safely stowed in the back. Dell reached into the van and pulled out a battered leather suitcase. He handled it with a reverence usually reserved for religious relics. "This is it, Rodney," Dell said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The beginning of the comeback." "Dell, it's a suitcase," Rodney said. "What's in it?" "More umbrellas." Dell popped the latches. Inside were hundreds of small, plastic devices that looked like a cross between a calculator and a remote control. "Electronic personal organizers," Dell announced. "The future of business, Rodney. Every man in London is going to want one. It's got a clock, a calendar, and a button that makes a beeping noise." "Dell, Everyone has these on their phones now. Rodney said, holding one up. It's 2002. This technology is practically prehistoric. Dell shook his head, a look of pity on his face. That's where you're wrong, Rodney. People miss the tactile experience. They want something they can hold, something with weight. These are vintage tech. It's the latest trend. I'm telling you, by this time next year, Rodney cut him off. We'll be millionaires. I know. Dell, I know. They stood there for a moment, two brothers in a three-wheeled van, surrounded by the debris of 100 failed schemes and the flickering hope of 1,000 more. I'll fetch the suitcase from the van, Dell repeated, a small smile playing on his lips, because where it all comes from is a mystery, Rodney. But as long as we're together, we're the bestest. Rodney looked at the suitcase, then at his brother. He let out a long, slow breath and climbed into the passenger seat. All right, Dell, drive on. But if we pass a skip, those shock absorbers are going in it. Deal. Dell laughed, turning the key. The engine coughed, spluttered, and finally roared into life. Next stop, Paris. Or maybe just the car boot sail in Sidcup. Mange tout, Rodney. Mange tout. The E and D for now. The Peckham Redemption. A Trotter Odyssey. Chapter 1, The Gray Room of Reality. The office of Justin, a man whose suit cost more than the Trotters' combined monthly income during their lean years, smelled of expensive furniture polish and the cold, sterile scent of bureaucracy. Outside the window, the London skyline was draped in a miserable, drizzling shroud of gray, but inside, the fluorescent lights hummed with a predatory energy. Derek Delboy Trotter sat on the edge of a leather chair that felt far too soft for a man who preferred the hard, honest stools of the Nag's Head. He adjusted his tie, smoothed his hair, and tried to summon the ghost of the multimillionaire he had been only months ago. Across from him sat Rodney, looking like a man who had been caught in a storm without an umbrella and had finally given up on trying to stay dry. So Justin said, clicking a heavy silver pen, "Mr. Trotter, I have the basic details of the business career, the colorful history of Trotter's independent traders. But I'm looking for the soul of the story, your raison d'etre." Dell leaned forward, his eyes twinkling with a desperate, familiar spark. "My what?" "Oh, the laboratory garni." "Yes, quite. It's a French term, isn't it? Very sophisticated." Rodney groaned softly, a sound that started in his toes and ended in a weary exhale. "It means reason for being, Dell, not a garnish." "I knew that, Rodney. I was just testing the boy." Dell snapped, then turned back to Justin with a grin that didn't quite reach his ears. "Well, Justin, where do I start? We were just ordinary blokes. Working class heroes, you might say, living the dream in a high-rise in Peckham. And then we found it." Dell's mind drifted back. He could almost smell the dust of the garage where they had found the Harrison Lesser watch. He remembered the silence of the auction house, the way the gavel had sounded like a thunderclap when it hit the block at 6.2 million pounds. For a moment, he wasn't in a bankruptcy hearing. He was on a beach in Barbados, a pina colada in one hand and the world in the other. We were gonna donate it to the British Museum. Del lied, his voice softening with practiced nostalgia. A national treasure, we thought. But then Rodney, here ever the practical one, suggested we flog it. Before you know it, we were divvying up the dosh. 6.5 million quid. Justin. Enough to make the Sultan of Brunei look like he was on the social. He glanced at Rodney, who was staring at his own shoes. The memory of the money was like a phantom limb. They could still feel it, but it wasn't there anymore. We took care of our own. Of course, Del continued. Uncle Albert got a nice little drink. Charity, too. We were enormously philanthropic. But then, the stock market, a vibrant venture in Central America. It was a sure thing, Justin. A gold mine. It was a black hole, Rodney muttered. Details, Rodney. It was a market attracting funds from all over the globe. We were making more money than the Royal Mint. We had the family with us, Raquel, Cassandra, the Nipper Damien. We were the kings of the castle. Dole's voice faltered. The castle had been built of sand, and the tide had come in with the ferocity of a hurricane. Chapter 2. The Fall of the House of Trotter. The transition from champagne to light ale happened so fast it gave the Trotters financial whiplash. One day, Del was ordering custom-made silk dressing gowns. The next, he was checking the back of the sofa for loose change. The Central American market hadn't just crashed, it had vaporized. The creative solution, Del had come up with a series of increasingly desperate credit card maneuvers had only delayed the inevitable. When the news hit the UK, the business associates who had once laughed at Del's jokes and toasted his success suddenly found that their phones didn't work. It was a financial wilderness, Del told Justin, his voice dropping an octave. But Peckham looks after its own. Mike Fisher, the landlord of the Nag's Head, he's a saint, Justin, a man of vision. He's in prison, Del, Rodney reminded him. He remortgaged the pub to follow your lead. He's awaiting trial for embezzlement. He pleaded guilty because he's a man of honor, Del shouted, though even he knew how hollow it sounded. The scene shifted in Del's memory to the corridors of the courthouse. Denzel, Trigger, Boykeet, the character witnesses who looked more like a police lineup than a support group. Denzel had been pacing the floorboards then, convinced that his testimony would lead to a life sentence for everyone involved. Trigger, in his own inimitable way, had been hearing voices again. Trig, Del had whispered in the hallway, just tell them I'm a pillar of the community. I'll tell them I hear voices. Del, Trigger had replied, his eyes glazed with a strange, internal peace. It'll explain a lot. The memory was bitter. The court hadn't sent them to prison that would have been too merciful. Instead, they had been stripped. The riverfront property, the peacocks, the estate all gone. All that remained was the one thing Dell had kept in his back pocket, the old flat in Nelson Mandela House. The return to the estate had been a funeral procession in a yellow three-wheeled van. The lifts were still broken. The graffiti was new, but the smell of stale cabbage and disappointment was exactly the same as they had left it. Chapter 3, The Ancient Mariner's Last Voyage. The loss of the money was a tragedy, but the loss of Uncle Albert was something else entirely. It was the end of an era. The man who had survived the Battle of the Baltic, 3 shipwrecks, and countless wartime sagas had finally reached his final port of call. The funeral was, in true Trotter fashion, a masterpiece of misunderstanding. Dell stood at the graveside, his eyes misty behind his sunglasses. He had felt guilty, terribly guilty about leaving Albert behind while they were off globe-trotting in Barbados. Albert had lived his final months in a rest home, while Elsie Partridge, his girlfriend, who was old enough to have witnessed the construction of Stonehenge, looked after him. He loved his cognac, Dell whispered to the assembly of mourners, half of whom he didn't recognize, kept the old colds at bay. He looked at Rodney and Cassandra, who were holding hands, their faces masks of solemnity. Then there was Damien, Dell's son, looking like a miniature version of a Peckham wide boy, already eyeing the silver handles on the coffin. Dell's cousin Roland, a man with the personality of a damp sponge, leaned in. He did go on, didn't he? All those wartime stories. Never bloody stopped. Dell felt a surge of protectiveness. He won the war, Roland, in his own way. Every bloke who fought did. They fought for our freedom for prats like you to knock in 50 years later. All right, Dell, take it easy, Rodney cautioned. But Dell was on a roll. He looked around the cemetery, wondering where the old gang was. Where was Sid? Where was Mike? He felt a deep sense of isolation. Then he looked at the headstone. He looked at the photo of the deceased. He looked at the name. "Is that a Spitfire, Dad?" Damien asked, pointing at a floral arrangement. Dell squinted. "Rotters. I think we're at the wrong funeral." "What?" "This isn't Albert. This is a bloke named Bunny Warren. He was in the RAF." The realization hit them like a cold bucket of water. They were mourning a complete stranger, while Albert was likely being lowered into the ground 3 plots over. It was the ultimate plonker moment, a final joke from the universe that reminded them that even in death, the Trotters couldn't quite get it right. Chapter 4, The Bankruptcy Blues. Back in the flat, the reality of their situation settled in like a thick, suffocating fog. Raquel was quiet, her disappointment radiating off her in waves. Cassandra was looking for a way out back to the bank, back to a life that didn't involve 3-wheeled vans and tax evasion. $48,750 for pounds, Dell muttered, staring at the letter from the Inland Revenue, plus interest. "You forgot the for quid, Del," Rodney said, his voice flat. "The for quid is the least of our worries. They're gonna take the flat, Rodney. They're gonna auction the roof from over our heads." Del paced the small living room, his mind whirring like a rusty engine. He was a trader. He had been trading since he was 12. He could sell sand to the Arabs and ice to the Eskimos. He just needed a hook, a new angle. "Trotter's Independent Traders isn't dead," Del declared, pointing a finger at Rodney. "It's just under new management. Del, you're disqualified from running a company. If you so much as buy a pint of milk for business purposes, they'll bang you up. I know. That's why you're the new managing director, Rodney." Rodney froze. The idea of being the boss of the chaotic enterprise that had ruined his life was both terrifying and strangely alluring. He saw a chance to finally have some control, to stop being the brother who keeps the Christmas parties organized. "I'll be in charge of sales, purchasing, and finance," Rodney said, trying to sound authoritative. "Exactly. And I'll be your consultant, your silent partner, the power behind the throne." For a few days, there was a glimmer of hope. They printed new business cards. Rodney started wearing a suitor on the flat. He even started listening to Mozart to ease his executive stress. But the ghost of their past was always hovering. The Sultan of Brunei didn't call. Mickey Pierce did. "Rodney, it's the Sultan," Del had yelled through the door. A cruel prank that had left Rodney fuming. The tension in the house was reaching a breaking point. Cassandra wanted a baby. Rodney wanted a career. Del wanted his dignity back. And then came the game show. Chapter 5, The Gold Rush Gamble. Gold Rush, the fastest game show on TV. Hosted by Jonathan Ross. The prize, £100,000. To Del, it was the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card. He had spent weeks preparing, which for Del meant watching old episodes of University Challenge and pretending to understand 16th century Italian Renaissance art. "I'm a man of the world, Raquel," he told her as he adjusted his cufflinks in the mirror. "I've got broad shoulders. The buck stops here." The studio was a blur of neon lights and shouting audiences. Del felt like a gladiator entering the Colosseum. He was up against a financial advisor from Merseyside and an amateur opera singer from New Quay. And finally, "We have Derek Trotter from Peckham," Jonathan Ross announced. "Pastimes include fine wines, the theater, and Italian art. Welcome, Derek." "Lovely jubbly, Jonathan," Del chirped, his palms sweating. The timed round was a disaster. Del answered Mrs. Dale to a question about the Great Fire of London. He felt the audience's laughter like a physical blow. But through a stroke of luck and the failure of the other contestants, he found himself on the Rainbow Road. He moved through the questions with a mixture of luck and pure, unadulterated bluff. He knew Kilimanjaro was a mountain because he'd once tried to sell coffee with a similar name. He knew President Kennedy had been in a terrible state when he died. Then came the 50,000 pounds question. Which classical guitarist wrote the opera The Child and the Enchantment? Was it Ravel, Segovia, or Rodrigo? Dell felt the world tilt. He didn't know classical music. He knew the old rugged cross and the theme to the bill. He looked at the audience. He looked at the clock. I'll use my SOS, Jonathan, Dell said, his voice cracking. I'll call my brother, Rodney. He's got to GCE's. The phone rang in the flat in Peckham. Rodney, dressed as Russell Crowe for a fantasy therapy session with Cassandra, who was dressed as a policewoman, picked up. Hello, is that Rodney? This is Jonathan Ross. Oh, piss off, Mickey Pierce, Rodney yelled. The studio audience erupted. Dell wanted to crawl into a hole and die, but eventually the message got through. Rodney, help me for 50 grand. Which classical guitarist? Ravel, Segovia, or Rodrigo? Ravel, Rodney said, his voice confident. I'm 100% sure. Dell, I know my classics. Dell turned back to Jonathan Ross, a look of triumph on his face. It's Ravel, Jonathan. Final answer. Derek, that was the wrong answer. It was Segovia. The silence in the studio was louder than any applause. Dell felt the Rainbow Road crumble beneath his feet. He had lost it all. Again. Chapter 6. The morning after the night before. The cab ride back to Peckham was the longest of Dell's life. He had abandoned Raquel and Damien at the studio in his rush to flee the scene of his public humiliation. He had walked through London for hours, looking at the city that had once been his playground and was now his judge. When he finally walked through the door of the flat, he found Rodney and Cassandra sitting in the dim light of the television. How's your evening been, Rodney? Dell asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Not very good, to be honest, Rodney replied. A bloody snap. Dell shouted. Everyone knows Ravel makes shoes. It was a trick question, and you fell for it. He's got to GCE's, Raquel yelled from the kitchen. The argument that followed was a master class in Trotter's sibling rivalry. The bone marrow was brought up. The mother's dying wish was invoked. The yellow Capri was banned. But then the phone rang. Hello, Rodney answered. Yes, can I ask who's calling? He looked at Dell, his eyes wide. Dell, it's the producer of Gold Rush. Dell took the phone with a trembling hand. Yes, this is Derek Trotter. What? No. He listened for a moment, his face transforming from a mask of despair to a glowing beacon of hope. He hung up and looked at the family. They made a mistake, Dell whispered. The producer, he said there was a technical error. It was Ravel, or something. They're giving me the 50 grand and I'm going back on the show for the 100. Yes, Rodney cheered. But as Dell looked at the phone, he heard a faint sound from the receiver, the sound of a jukebox, the sound of laughter, the sound of Mickey Pierce. I'm gonna kill him, Dell whispered. I'm actually gonna kill him. But as he looked around the room at Raquel, at Rodney, at the nipper sleeping in the corner, he realized something. They were broke. They were bankrupt. They were back in the flat. But they were still the Trotters. This time next year, Dell said, a familiar glint returning to his eyes. This time next year, we'll be millionaires. Rodney looked at him, a weary smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. You're a plonker, Dell, a total plonker. I know, Rodney. Dell grinned, patting his brother on the shoulder. But I'm your plonker. Now, let's get down the nag's head. I think I know a bloke who's got a consignment of digital watches that only work in the dark. It's a gold mine. Rotters. A literal gold mine. The sun began to rise over Peckham, casting a golden light over the tower blocks and the market stalls. The Trotters were back in business. Chapter 7, The Market of Broken Dreams. The Monday morning air in Peckham was thick with the smell of exhaust fumes and cheap fried breakfast. Del Boy stood behind his suitcase, which was perched precariously on a folding table outside the Nag's Head. In the suitcase lay the literal gold mine, 200 digital watches that glowed with a neon intensity but had the structural integrity of wet cardboard. Roll up, Del shouted, his voice echoing against the brick walls of the pub. The latest in chronometric technology. These watches are so advanced, they only work in the dark to save your eyesight. A few locals wandered by, their faces etched with the skepticism of people who had been buying genuine designer goods from Dell since the late 70s. Is that right, Dell? Trigger asked, stopping to squint at a watch that was flashing 88 to 88. What if I want to know the time at lunch? Then you go into a cupboard. Trig, it's about the aesthetic. It's about the vibe. Del leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Between you and me, these were destined for the special forces, but the contract fell through because they were too stealthy. Trigger nodded slowly, his mind processing this information at its usual glacial pace. I'll take 2, Del, 1 for each wrist, in case I get lost in a really long tunnel. Del beamed, pocketing the crumpled fivers. It wasn't the millions he'd lost, but it was a start. It was the hum of the hustle, the friction of the trade. Behind him, Rodney approached, looking every bit the managing director in a suit that was starting to fray at the cuffs. He held a clipboard as if it were a shield against the reality of their situation. Del, we've got a problem, Rodney said, his voice tense. Rodney, I'm in the middle of a major international arms deal, watch deal. What's up? The Inland Revenue. I've been looking at the Year of Grace document. They don't just want the 50 grand, Del. They want it in 12 monthly installments. The first one is due next Friday. Dell's smile didn't falter, but his eyes hardened. How much? For £1,000, Del, and 66 pence. Del looked at the suitcase of glowing watches. He looked at Trigger, who was currently trying to find a dark corner of the street to test his new purchases. Right, Del said, snapping the suitcase shut. New plan. We're not just selling watches. We're branching out into event management. Event management? Rodney groaned. Del, the last event you managed was Albert's funeral, and we buried the wrong bloke. That was a dress rehearsal. Rodney, this is the big time. Peckham's first ever millionaires reunion at the Nag's Head. We charge for entry, we sell the watches as souvenirs, and we have a raffle for a weekend in a luxury penthouse, well, a weekend in our flat. But I'll put a penthouse sign on the door. Rodney stared at his brother. He saw the madness, the desperation, and the flickering ember of the man who had once stood on a beach in Barbados. He sighed, adjusting his clipboard. I'll check the insurance, Rodney muttered. But if I end up in a cell next to Mike, I'm telling the warden it was all your fault. That's the spirit, Rodders, potpourri. This time next week, we'll have that installment covered. I can feel it in my bones. Chapter 8, The Shadow of the Night. While Del was busy planning his millionaires' reunion, the atmosphere inside Nelson Mandela House was simmering with a different kind of tension. Raquel and Cassandra sat in the kitchen, the steam from their mugs of tea rising into the cold air. He's doing it again, isn't he? Raquel asked, her voice weary. Cassandra nodded. The managing director act. Rodney spends all day drawing graphs that lead to nowhere, and Del spends all night dreaming of schemes that lead to the police station. They shared a look of mutual understanding, the bond of two women who had married into a whirlwind and were now trying to find their footing in the wreckage. I went back to the bank today, Cassandra said softly. They offered me my old job, but the salary, it's not enough to get us out of here, not with the debt hanging over them. Raquel reached across the table and squeezed her hand. We've been through worse. Cass, remember when we thought Damien was going to be the Antichrist because of that weird birthmark? He still might be, Cassandra joked, though the smile didn't reach her eyes. He's currently trying to charge the neighborhood kids for protection from imaginary monsters. He's a trotter, Raquel sighed. It's in the blood. Outside, the lift groaned as it made its agonizing ascent. The sound of Dul's voice loud, optimistic, and dangerously charismatic filtered through the door. And then, Rodney, we get Mickey Pierce to dress up as a waiter. It adds class. The women looked at each other. They knew the cycle, the hope, the hustle, the inevitable crash. But as the door swung open and Del burst in, smelling of cheap cigars and the cold Peckham night, he looked at them with such genuine affection that for a moment The debt didn't matter. Ladies, put the kettle on, Del shouted, tossing his coat onto the sofa. I've just had a meeting with a major player in the catering industry, Sid from the cafe, and we are go for launch. Peckham isn't ready for what's coming. We know, Del, Raquel said, standing up to fetch another mug. We really know. The Trotters were back. They were broke. They were bankrupt. And they were probably doomed. But as the lights of the estate flickered in the dark, they were together. And in the heart of Peckham, that was the only thing that had ever really been worth £6.5 million. Chapter 9, The Millionaire's Reunion. The nag's head was transformed, or at least that was how Del described it. To anyone else, it looked like a pub with some wilting tinsel and a hand-drawn sign that said VIP entrance taped over the side door. Del was in his element, wearing his best camel hair coat and a pair of sunglasses despite being indoors. Evening, Boyke, Del greeted as the used car salesman swaggered in, Marlene clinging to his arm like a decorative vine. Trotter, Boyke drawled, his nasal laugh cutting through the smoky air. I heard you were holding a millionaire's reunion. I didn't realize you were inviting the destitute as well. Or is this a benefit for your bankruptcy fund? Very funny. Boyke, always the wag, Del said, his teeth gritted in a smile. That'll be 20 quid for the entry fee, plus 10 for the souvenir Special Forces watch. Marlene looked at the glowing green watches in the suitcase. Ooh, look at those. Herman, they match my earrings. Boyke sighed, peeling off a 20-pound note. If this watch explodes, Trotter, I'm suing you for emotional distress and physical disfigurement. The evening was a blur of cheap bubbly and increasingly tall tales. Rodney stood by the raffle box, looking deeply uncomfortable in a tuxedo that was two sizes too small. He was currently trying to explain to Denzel why the weekend in a luxury penthouse was actually a stay at Nelson Mandela House. It's an urban experience, Denzel, Rodney pleaded, very trendy with the Shoreditch crowd. Suddenly, a loud buzzing sound filled the room. One by one, the Special Forces watches on people's wrists began to vibrate violently, emitting a shrill, high-pitched beep. Del, Trigger shouted, holding his wrist out as his watch began to smoke. I think mine's trying to communicate with the mothership. Panic flared. Within seconds, half the pub was vibrating, and a faint smell of burning plastic filled the air. It's a feature, Del yelled over the noise, his voice cracking with desperation. It's an internal cooling system. It's a fire hazard, you plonker. Rodney screamed, rushing over to help Marlene remove her glowing, smoking watch. The millionaire's reunion ended not with a toast, but with Sid from the cafe using a fire extinguisher on the raffle box. As the crowd filed out, grumbling and demanding their entry fees back, Del stood in the middle of the empty, foam-covered pub. Well, Rodney said, wiping a glob of fire extinguisher foam from his tuxedo sleeve. That's another 1,000 pounds down the drain. Dell looked at the pile of charred watches. He looked at the empty till. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a single, crumpled 5-pound note that Trigger had forgotten to ask for back. "Don't worry, Rodney," Dell said, his voice quiet but steady. "We've still got the Urban Experience raffle winner, and I think I know a bloke who's looking for a large quantity of slightly singed plastic." Chapter 10, A New Dawn in Peckham. An hour later, Dell and Rodney were sitting on the balcony of Nelson Mandela House. Below them, the lights of Peckham twinkled like distant, unattainable stars. The air was cold, but the shared silence between the brothers was warm. "You really are a nightmare, Dell," Rodney said, staring out at the horizon. "I know, Rodney, but I'm a nightmare with a vision. The vision just nearly burnt down our local pub." Dell chuckled, a low, dry sound. "Yeah, it was a bit extravagant, wasn't it?" He leaned against the rusty railing, his gaze softening. "I was thinking about Mum earlier. She always said, 'Dell, look after Rodney. Make sure he reaches for the moon.' And instead, you've got me reaching for the bankruptcy courts," Rodney muttered, but there was no malice in his voice. "We'll get there, Rogers. We've had the millions, and we've had the pennies, but we've still got the flat. We've got the girls, and we've got each other. That's the real gold mine." Rodney looked at his brother. He saw the gray hairs in those sideburns, the lines of exhaustion around his eyes. He realized then that Dell wasn't just hustling for the money, he was hustling to keep the world from closing in on them. "So," Rodney said, standing up and dusting off his trousers, "what's the next big thing? Digital toasters, self-tying shoelaces." Those eyes lit up with that familiar, dangerous spark. "Funny you should mention that, Rodney. I was talking to a bloke in the pub well just before the fire, and he's got a lead on a consignment of solar-powered umbrellas." Rodney stared at him for a long beat. "Solar-powered umbrellas? Think about it, Rodney. You use 'em when it's sunny to stay cool, and they charge up a little fan in the handle. It's a literal gold mine." Rodney started to laugh. It started as a giggle and turned into a full-blown, belly-aching roar. Dell joined in, his laughter echoing through the concrete corridors of the estate. "This time next year, Rodney," Dell shouted into the night air, "this time next year, we'll be millionaires." "You're a plonker, Dell boy," Rodney yelled back. "A total and utter plonker. Mange tout, Rodney, mange tout." As the sun began to peek over the horizon, casting a pale, hopeful light over the rooftops of Peckham, the trotters were already planning their next great escape. They were broken, they were broke, but they were far from defeated. The Peckham Phoenix, a novelization of the Trotter Chronicles. Chapter 1, The Yellow Ghost of Peckham. The yellow three-wheeled Reliant Regal then rattled through the streets of Peckham like a skeletal remains of a decade everyone else had tried to forget. On its side, the faded lettering still defiantly proclaimed, Trotters Independent Traders, New York, Paris, Peckham. It was a lie, of course. They had been to Paris briefly. They had never been to New York, and Peckham was currently trying its best to pretend they didn't exist. Derek Del Boy Trotter sat behind the wheel, his rings catching the stray glints of a London sun that looked like it had been filtered through a greasy chip wrapper. He was humming the theme tune to his own life, a melody of seasons changing and tides turning. I'll fetch the suitcase from the van, he muttered to himself, a mantra of the perpetual salesman. Beside him sat Rodney. Rodney, the graduate with 2 GCEs and a brain that was currently a chaotic blender of existential dread and marital anxiety. Rodney was looking at the dashboard as if it were a ticking bomb. "What's up with you, Rodney?" Del asked, his voice a gravelly mix of concern and irritation. "You look like a man who's just found out his lottery ticket was for last week's draw." "I'm a bit nervous, Del," Rodney admitted, his voice cracking slightly. "This bloke we're going to see, this Justin, he's a documentary maker, right? He's not going to be asking me anything personal about my private life." Del swung the van around a corner with the grace of a shopping trolley in a hurricane. "Of course he ain't. We're not that private, are we? We're public figures, the Trotters of Nelson Mandela House. But what about, me and Cassandra, our hiccups?" Del rolled his eyes. "He's not going to want to know about your little problems in the bedroom department, Rodney. Though, strictly speaking, if you're having hiccups in the bedroom, you're probably doing it wrong." "I told you that in confidence," Rodney hissed, his face reddening to the color of a ripe tomato. "And I'm keeping it in confidence," Del shouted back. "I'm not going to be telling him about jiffins and what Cassandra wears. I've got more class than that, mostly." Chapter 2, The Interrogator. Justin was the kind of man who wore spectacles not because he needed them, but because they made his expensive degree look even more expensive. His office was a minimalist vacuum of white walls and overpriced Scandinavian furniture. He looked at the Trotter brothers as if they were a rare species of beetle that had accidentally crawled onto his silk tie. "Sorry to keep you waiting," Justin said, his voice dripping with the practiced sincerity of a BBC middle manager. "It's been a particularly busy morning. Now, I've got all the basic details about your business career, the watches, the bottled water, the pre-war lead soldiers. But what I'd like to do is to get an insight into the real you." Del leaned back, crossing his legs and adjusting his tie. He felt at home. Give Del Boy an audience and a chance to rewrite history, and he was more dangerous than a shark in a tuxedo. "How you started how you became so successful, Justin continued, leaning forward. But more importantly, your lives and your race on Deatter. Del blinked. Oh, no. Laboratory Garni. I don't use that stuff. It's all natural, this hair. Rodney groaned into his hands. He means reason for being. Del. I knew that. Del snapped. I was just checking if he did. Right then, Justin. Where shall I start? Up to a few years ago, we were just very ordinary people living very ordinary lives. Weren't we, Rodney? Rodney gave a hollow laugh. Ordinary. Del, our childhood involved hiding from the rent collector behind a sofa that was technically also being repossessed. Details, details. Del waved a hand dismissively. And then, as you know, one day I discovered an historic and almost priceless artifact. A watch. A Harrison Lesser watch. Found it in the back of a garage. It was like a sign from the gods of commerce. Chapter 3, The Golden Age. For a brief, shimmering moment in the mid-90s, the Trotters had been kings. The novel of their lives had transitioned from a gritty social drama to a glossy jet-set thriller. Anyway, Del continued, his eyes glazing over with the memory of pure, unadulterated wealth. At first, we didn't know what to do with it. We thought about donating it to the British Museum as a national treasure. We really did. We felt a sense of duty to the crown. We thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. Rodney corrected. And then we decided to flog it. Del grinned. 6.5 million quid, Justin. Can you imagine that? 6.5 million of the Queen's finest nuggets. We divvied the dosh up, making sure our Uncle Albert got a nice little drink, bless his old seafaring soul, and we thought of others. We donated to charity. Enormously, of course. We bought a round of drinks for the whole Nag's Head, Rodney whispered. That was our charity work. It felt like a charity, Del insisted. Have you seen the state of Trigger? He needs all the help he can get. So, eventually, we had to start thinking about our future. We sought out a city stockbroker, a man with a tie thinner than a strand of spaghetti and a brain like a calculator. He advised us to invest in a new and vibrant venture, a Central American market. Del stood up, pacing the small office. It was attracting massive funds from all over the world. We were making more money than the Royal Mint. We weren't just flat, Justin. We were ascendant. Chapter 4, The Fall of the Empire. The flashback in Del's mind was vivid. He remembered the heat of the Caribbean, the smell of expensive sun cream, and the feeling of a platinum credit card in his pocket, a card that felt like it had the power to stop the rotation of the earth if he swiped it hard enough. He remembered Raquel, his significant other, looking like a movie star in a wide-brimmed hat. He remembered young Damien, the fruit of his loins, playing on the deck of a yacht. He remembered Rodney and Cassandra, looking like they finally belonged in a world where the wine didn't come from a box. And then the music changed. It wasn't a sudden explosion. It was the sound of a phone not ringing. It was the sight of a computer screen flickering with red numbers that shouldn't have been there. She's into superstitions. The radio had been playing in the hotel lobby. Livin' La Vida Loca. It turned out, Del said, his voice dropping an octave, that negotiations between the Central American countries had collapsed, wiped out. The market didn't just crash. It evaporated. It was like someone had pulled the plug on the ocean. We'd even paid for the hotel on a credit card. Rodney added, the ghost of the trauma still visible in his eyes. A credit card which was withdrawn while we were still at the breakfast buffet. I was halfway through a bowl of exotic fruit, and suddenly I was an international pauper. Del nodded solemnly, but Derek Trotter is, if nothing else, a creative businessman. I came up with a solution. We had to leave. Fast. We ran, Rodney said. We literally ran for the airport while the concierge was still looking for the bill. Chapter 5. The Financial Wilderness. The return to the UK was not met with a ticker-tape parade. The news of the Trotter collapse had traveled faster than a Peckham rumor. How long did it take for the news to hit the UK? Justin asked, scribbling notes furiously. About as long as it took for someone to push a button on the internet. Del sighed. Suddenly, all our so-called business associates wouldn't return our calls. We were cast into a financial wilderness. It was like the desert, but with more rain and less sand. And then there was Mike. Rodney reminded him. Del's face darkened. Mike Fisher, the landlord of the Nag's Head, a man who had seen the Trotters as his ticket out of the pub trade. Mike invested his life savings in our venture, Del explained. He actually remortgaged the pub. He's in prison now, awaiting trial. The fraud squad claims he tried to recoup his losses by embezzling the brewery. Never was a man more innocent. He confessed to everything, Del, Rodney pointed out. He was under duress, Del shouted. The pressure of the brewing industry is immense. The narrative shifted to the waiting room of the court. The atmosphere was thick with the smell of cheap coffee and the nervous sweat of Peckham's finest. Denzel was pacing, wearing the marble floor down. Uncle Albert was sitting there, looking like a weary old owl. Trigger was. Well, Trigger was staring at a wall, possibly having a conversation with his own shadow. Trig, if I go in there and tell the truth, Denzel had said, Del and Rodney are going to be spending the next 5 years sharpening Jeffrey Archer's pencils. I'm going to tell them I hear voices. Trigger had replied, with the terrifying sincerity of the truly confused. Chapter 6. The Wrong Side of the Grave. The funeral of Uncle Albert should have been a moment of dignified sorrow. Instead, it was a master class in Trotter-esque absurdity. The family stood in the biting cold of a coastal cemetery. Del was genuinely heartbroken. Albert had been their anchor, the man who had survived the Battle of the Baltic only to be nearly killed by those cooking. I feel bad, Del whispered to Rodney as they stood by the grave, leaving him here on his own while we were off globe-trotting. We should have taken him to Barbados. He didn't have a passport, Del, Rodney reminded him. He thought the Germans were still looking for him. They stood amongst a group of strangers. A woman named Marion was crying. A man named Roland was complaining about Albert's wartime sagas. God, he did go on, didn't he? Roland sneered. Never bloody stopped. The John Wayne of the East End. Those blood began to simmer. It reached boiling point. He stepped forward, his eyes blazing. You've got to remember that a lot of blokes lost their lives for our liberty, just so that 50 years later, prats like you would have the freedom to knock them. You want to go outside and have a chat, Roland? Calm down, Del, Rodney pleaded. It was only when the young boy, Damien, looked up at a passing plane and asked if it was a Spitfire that the reality hit them. Wait a minute, Del said, looking at the headstone. Bunny. Why did you call him Bunny? Because his surname was Warren, Roland said. Albert Warren. Raff. The silence that followed was heavy. Rodney, Del whispered, his face turning ashen. We're at the wrong funeral. Oh, 4. Let's go. Rodney hissed, grabbing Del's arm. They fled the cemetery like grave robbers who had forgotten their shovels. Chapter 7, The Phoenix Arises, sort of. Back in Nelson Mandela House, the grandeur of the millionaire years felt like a dream someone else had had. The flat was cramped, the wallpaper was peeling, and the Inland Revenue was knocking on the door with the persistence of a woodpecker on a metal pole. The court declared me bankrupt, Del announced to the family. But don't worry, I've worked it all out. I'm a trader. I could sell rice to the Chinese. The firm's been liquidized, Del, Rodney said, sitting at the kitchen table. Disqualified, Del corrected. I've been disqualified from running it. That doesn't mean the company is dead. We just need a new managing director. Someone young. Someone enthusiastic. Someone with GCEs. Rodney looked up, a glimmer of hope or madness in his eyes. Me. Yes, you, Rodney. You can take over Trotter's independent traders. Legally, there's nothing to stop you. You're clean, mostly. And so, the new era began. Rodney Trotter, managing director, Del took a back seat, or rather, he sat in the front seat and shouted directions while Rodney tried to drive. They were back in business. They were trading again. The goal, $48,750 for pounds. That was the debt. That was the mountain they had to climb. Chapter 8, The Golden Ticket. The idea for Gold Rush came to Del like a divine revelation during a late-night session of channel hopping. It's a game show, Rodney, Del shouted, bursting into the living room. Jonathan Ross, you can win 100,000 quid. It's the fastest game show on TV. Del, you think King Edward introduced the potato to England? Rodney said flatly. I didn't hear the question properly. Del insisted. I've worked it out. I'm going to apply. This time next year, we'll be millionaires. Again. This time last week we were millionaires, Cassandra pointed out from the kitchen. But Del was already filling out the form. He wasn't just a bankrupt salesman from Peckham anymore. In his mind, he was a Renaissance man, a lover of fine wines, the theater, and 16th century Italian art. He was Derek Trotter, and the world hadn't seen the last of him. Chapter 9, The Brunei Connection. The telephone in the Trotter household was a fickle instrument. Sometimes it brought news of a consignment of Hookie v. Sears. Other times, it was just the electric company wondering if Del intended to pay his bill within the current century. One evening, as Rodney was trying to maintain a facade of managing director gravitas, the phone rang. Trotter's Independent Traders, how may I help you? Rodney said, his voice an octave deeper than usual. Good evening, a voice responded, accented and dripping with importance. I am wishing to speak with managing director. This is he, Rodney said, puffing out his chest. My name is Rodney Trotter. I am representative of the Sultan of Brunei, the voice continued. Rodney's heart did a little tap dance against his ribs. He looked at Del, who was currently trying to clean a fake Rolex with a bit of spit and a rag. Del, it's the Sultan of Brunei. Del stopped rubbing the watch. Yeah, and I'm the Pope's golf partner. Give it here. But Rodney was already hooked. How may I be of assistance, sir? His Highness has seen your advertisement in the newspaper. He would like you to fly to Brunei and be his consultant. Rodney's eyes glazed over. He could see it now. Gold-plated yachts, silk robes, and a world where duty-free wasn't just a suggestion. Consultant. On what, specifically? Recently, the voice said, suppressed laughter starting to bubble through the accent, His Highness bought a crappy old three-wheeled van, and he wants to know how to start it on cold mornings. The line exploded into the unmistakable, high-pitched cackle of Mickey Pierce. Rodney slammed the phone down. I knew it was him. I was just winding him up. Del shook his head. Rodney, you're about as good at winding people up as a sundial in a coal cellar. Get back to your paperwork. Chapter 10, Fantasy Therapy. Rodney's marriage to Cassandra was, in his own words, a series of minor hiccups in the bedroom department. To address this, Rodney had turned to the modern equivalent of a witch doctor, a lifestyle magazine. It's called Fantasy Therapy. Cass, Rodney explained that night, his voice hushed. This expert in America says our troubles stem from memory baggage. We need to become different people, reborn. Cassandra looked at him over the top of her book. Different people. Do I get to be someone who lives in a house without a yellow vent parked outside? No, it's about iconoclastic autosuggestion. Rodney insisted. We write down our fantasy figure, and for one night, the other person becomes that figure. No dressing up required. It's all in the mind. All right, Cassandra sighed. I'll try anything to stop you talking about memory baggage. They wrote down their choices. Cassandra handed her slip to Rodney. He opened it and blinked. The bill. You want me to be a copper? Just a position of authority, Rodney, she said, a mischievous glint in her eye. Rodney's own fantasy involved a certain gladiator, or maybe a heroic figure from a film he'd seen recently. He didn't say it, but he had a plan. The next evening, the plan went horribly wrong. Dell burst into the flat to find Cassandra dressed in a full policewoman's uniform, complete with a baton and a look of professional disapproval. Rodney, on the other hand, was standing there in a leather tunic, looking like he'd been rejected from a low-budget production of Spartacus. Oh, my God, Dell shouted, nearly dropping his bag of takeaway. I thought we were being raided. Cassandra, I didn't know you joined the force. And Rodney, what are you? A Roman centurion with a vitamin D deficiency. It's a fancy dress party. Dell, Rodney yelled, his face turning a shade of purple that matched his tunic. We're going to a party. My ex-boss at the bank invited us. At 5:30, Dell asked, skeptical, a bit early for a rave, isn't it? It's an early party for people who have to be up for work. Rodney grabbed Cassandra's arm. Come on, Reg Hollis. Let's go before he starts asking for our badges. Chapter 11, The Lights of Gold Rush. The BBC television studios were a labyrinth of cables, tired security guards, and the smell of industrial-grade hairspray. Dell stood in the wings of the Gold Rush set, adjusting his suit. He told the producers he was a connoisseur of the arts. He'd told them his hobbies included fine wines and 16th century Italian Renaissance art. In reality, his knowledge of fine wine stopped at anything that didn't have a screw top. And the only Renaissance art he owned was a framed picture of a crying boy that he'd bought at a car boot sale in 1984. Welcome to another edition of the show that is taking the country by storm. The voice of Jonathan Ross boomed through the speakers. This is Thursday. This is live. This is Jonathan Ross, and this is Gold Rush. Dell stepped onto the stage, his smile fixed, his rings gleaming under the studio lights. Beside him were his competitors, Mike Wallace, a financial advisor who looked like he'd swallowed a lemon, and Janice Scott, who seemed genuinely terrified of the cameras. And finally, Ross announced, "We have Derek Trotter from Peckham." Derek is a businessman who lives with Raquel, his significant other. His pastimes include fine wines, the theater, and 16th century Italian Renaissance art. Del gave a thumbs up. Lovely jubbly. Jonathan. Just happy to be here for the culture. You know. Chapter 12. The Rainbow Road. The game began with a flurry of questions. Del's finger was poised over the buzzer like a predator waiting for a slow-moving gazelle. Whose famous diary recorded the plague and the Great Fire of London? Ross asked. Del hit the buzzer. Mrs. Dale's. The studio went silent. Ross blinked. Nice try, Del, but I'm afraid that's not right. You're frozen now. Eventually, through a series of fluke errors by his opponents, Del found himself as the first challenger on the Rainbow Road. He stood in the center of the stage, a 1-pound coin clutched in his hand, his guaranteed prize. Whatever else happens, that's yours, Ross said. Just make sure it ain't Irish, eh? Del quipped, winking at the camera. He breezed through the early rounds. He knew Kilimanjaro was in Africa, mostly because he'd once tried to sell a crate of T-shirts with the mountain printed on the wrong side. He survived a challenge from Janice. The money climbed. 10,000, 25,000. And then the green question. In which state was President Kennedy born? Del hesitated. He remembered the news footage. He remembered the tragedy. Well, when he was assassinated in 1963, he was in a terrible state. He died. I need the name of the state. Del, Ross urged. Texas, Florida, or California? Del sweated. He used his shot in the dark. Florida, he shouted. No, Ross sighed. It was Texas. But you played your shot, so you're still in the game for the penalty question. Chapter 13, The Ravel Debacle. The penalty question was worth 50,000 pounds. If Del got it right, he'd move to the final gold question for 100,000. Which classical guitarist wrote the opera The Child and the Enchantment? Was it Ravel, Segovia, or Rodrigo? Del's brain stalled. Classical music. He was a man of the people. He liked the theme from Z Cars and anything by Tom Jones. He needed his SOS. He needed his brother. My brother, Rodney, Del said, he's a graduate to GCE's.